We'll open the floor to questions. I might cut them down so we can get people to morning tea and get us back on the program, back on track. But I think that should be aware to everyone now that there are pan-dimensional complexities to maritime trade. And I can say with some authority that policy formulation in the maritime domain in this country has taken up to a century. So I'd like to open the floor and get a few comments from each panel member. If you were to resolve the pan-dimensional challenges in the maritime domain, particularly with the reference to maritime trade, how would you go about it?
I'll start off. Before you can address any problem or any challenge, you've got to do a risk analysis. It's like getting the intelligence before you actually plan an operation. We haven't done a risk analysis, and we have to treat this as fundamentally important to national capability. Let's do a proper risk analysis, and then we can figure out what makes sense. That's the start.
Thank you.
I would add to that it's necessary to understand the depth of the issue.
Risk analysis, absolutely. To understand the pan-dimensional of the entire shipping sector across the entire trade network, which includes the land side and the port distribution complex, the intermodal change points, you need to understand the full depth of that across multiple industries and multiple countries on each trade route.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I think we need the data to begin with. I don't think we have the data. I don't think we've looked at what, if you like, storage capabilities we have in some cases, what our own internal refining capability is and manufacturing capability. So until we have any of that, then looking at what might happen in the maritime trade domain is, only looking at one part of it.
I think the historic lessons that have been pointed out in some of the earlier presentations have been fantastic. The issue is that it's really hard to maintain focus on the what if for the warfare scenario through 40 years of not warfare scenario. And modern warfare has changed from old warfare, we think. We see it now in, and as Chief of Navy said, strategic cycles are now 24 hours instead of 2 or 3 years in your planning. So something changes because someone uses a drone in a modern way. Someone flies a plane into a building. These are the salient events that change our paradigms and our thoughts. And it's changing our thoughts now in trade lane security back again, how we always thought we would. Looking at Australia's trade lanes, we've got lots of options, but unfortunately they tend to go to the same place. So it depends on who the belligerents are in the potential warfare. And there's a massive amount of excess capacity in shipping out there. You don't need to requisition it. You can hire it. There's no problem with that. All these guys with owners with ships that are sitting out there, as long as you can insure it, you can hire it and you can use it. This requirement to have your own flag on the back is a worry from my perspective, because it puts your own little bit of nationality floating around the ocean, which you then have an obligation to protect. And if we can't protect that obligation floating around the world, we'll be more embarrassed than if we're using someone else's flag.
Certainly.
If I can add one small thing to that, sorry, Teresa. What do we mean by requisition? Most people think it means you grab the ship, you grab the crew. Not true. You can requisition a single space on board the ship. World War II, World War I, all of the refrigerated cargo spaces on every ship going to and from Australia were requisitioned. The ships weren't.
I think there's an element of both that needs to be borne in mind. The idea that we don't need any capability, that we are going to rely on other nations not recalling their fleets, because that is part of the deal. You have a flag, you have an obligation to protect it, and that the quid pro quo of that is that if you get called, you go. And the fact that we have none of that, and I think one of the other comments made, it's easy to change flag. It is far from easy to change onto the Australian flag, I assure you. And part of that is because if you wanted to flag on the Australian flag tomorrow, there was more midshipmen in this room earlier today than what there is being trained across the whole of the country as we speak. There are no crews. So we are running into danger that even if we wanted to, we couldn't create a capability. So I take the point that you can requisition things differently, that you can charter from the market, but it goes beyond just war risk. There's crew risks, there's all sorts of other things that are going to roll on from this. And if you're going to send a crew into danger, you will pay for it and you'll pay through the teeth. And other nations will make decisions for their ships and for their nationals. And we don't know what those decisions are. So assuming that we're going to be able to take from the market, provided we're prepared to pay, is a pretty big assumption in the unknown world that we're in.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor up to questions, please.
My name is Peter Cook. I'm a private maritime security consultant. Radical idea. Why doesn't Australia establish an open registry? Sorry. Why doesn't Australia establish effectively an open registry?
They've tried. In 2012, they established the Australian International Shipping Register, which was supposed to be the equivalent of some of the other open registries. But the reason it doesn't work, the primary reason it doesn't work is the primary reason that our primary flag doesn't work, and that's that the corporate tax regime is not competitive with those available internationally. There are other issues with it, but that is the prime reason. You fix that and you start to fix some of the other issues straight away.
I'm actually going to agree with Teresa on this one, but I would also add that the other reason is that the unions have the right to negotiate on the operation of the vessel.
The union is the International Transport Workers Federation, which, as we all know, is currently chaired by the head of the Maritime Union of Australia. But that is the same union that any international ship with a blue agreement will have negotiated with, and that is the standard form for international. So we have yet to see that would actually cause a problem. Those of my members that have tried to go down that path, that has not been the problem they've encountered.
Question up the back.
Hi, Neil Westphalen. I'm a doctor, but I've actually got a non-doctor question. Is that better? Yeah, you've got to hold it right close. Given the interplay between the two protagonists here, if there was, what would be the effect of being able to hire ships with respect to having our own flagships as well? Would that actually drive the cost of hiring ships? Would the presence of Australian registered ships drive the insurance or the cost of hiring additional ships? Will it drive it up or down or not make any difference? You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it's the problem we have with trying to hire a ship and bring it onto the Australian flag is the challenges of having it on the Australian flag. Look, I'm not going to harp over the unions, but when I've had commercial operators trying to bring survey ships into Australia to do work and bring them onto the Australian flag, they've had to, change the accommodation, put new ovens in and new microwaves and bigger screen TVs in order to get the union approval to bring that vessel onto the flag. And that is ridiculous. So there are some problems from that perspective if it's on the Australian flag. On the AISR, it's not the same issue. And that is there shouldn't be any significant differences there. The other problem I've had with shipping companies telling me is that they cannot charter ships onto the Australian flag because the owners don't want them to be on the Australian flag because the seafarers don't maintain the vessels, and when they get them back, they're ready for scrapping.
Yeah, look, and that final point, Rod, mate, is true, as is the ability to get finance. Some financiers aren't that keen. But I think maybe the question is slightly different, and that's that if you've already got some own ships and you're chartering, does it actually change anything? Yeah. I think what it changes, and the important thing that it changes, is that we have the know-how to charter. How quickly are we as a nation going to lose the know-how to have any clue about how the shipping industry works? Because anybody that was left has gone to Singapore already. The number of Australian maritime professional expats in Singapore is through the roof. So who knows how to charter a ship in this country and who's just getting a dud deal? Because the international ship owners know a whole lot more about it than we do. So it's losing the know-how.
We'll go to one last question, please.
Good morning, Nick Stoker from the University of New South Wales Capability Systems Centre. Thanks very much for your presentations, and I think as Sean summed up, very informative in terms of the size, the boundary, the scope of, I guess, the challenge in terms of maritime trade and protection. I was just wondering, in terms of policy and from a strategic setting perspective, I'm just sort of thinking whether is the time no better now, given some continuity in government, maybe the fact that they've leant forward in terms of naval continuous shipbuilding and bringing that sort of public narrative around the maritime space, whether we can set forth and achieve that sort of national security strategy and really sort of bind the problem, set the boundaries around this maritime trade, bring it into the public narrative. I'll just be interested broadly on your views.
The problem is that the Australian government doesn't actually work at the integrated system level. You've got a defence department, you've got trade, this issue is foreign relations, it's trade, it's defence, it's pretty much every other department. But they don't work that way. When I wrote something on economic security recently, the PM&C staff approached me and said, we're not able to look at the link between the economy and the security in the way you're talking about. So first, it's how we work. We've got an industrial age structure in our government that's incapable of looking at system level risks. So the reality, I think, unfortunately, because of our complacency in the country, we have to have a crisis. Now, we're getting all excited about 10 cruise missiles. Imagine if it was at scale. It's going to have the language change, and unfortunately, that's going to take a lot of time because it's taken 7 years of me carrying on about fuel security to finally get some of the government committees to do something along with a lot of other protagonists. We do need it. Hopefully, the vector that we are on, which is not a good one globally, will make people realise that we as a country are not resilient, we're at risk, and we need to get on with it. I mean, people like Jim Molan are out there talking a lot about the need for a national security strategy. I'd like to see one of the ministers say the same thing, but I'm not holding my breath.
I'll just be very brief. I think you're right. Now would be a great time. And you're right about the narrative around naval shipbuilding. Exactly the same narrative can apply. And if you want to use the same parlance, we are currently approaching the valley of death for the merchant marine industry. And we have used that language, and it's just not getting traction for the reasons John's just articulated. The minister responsible for much of the shipping policy is the Deputy Prime Minister from the Nationals, and they can't seem to be able to think beyond the coastal shipping debate, which is where Rod and I really don't like to get along. But I think, if we had an integrated or a whole of government view, then we might have a different outcome because you're right, the arguments are the same.
We used to do it. We used to do it really, really well. We haven't done it for 2 generations. I don't think that this is a skill that is current in government to work across stovepipes as they did, but there's no reason we can't do it. We've done it before. We've done it before for a period of 70 years.
I think I just emphasise the issue of stovepipes, and Teresa and I are both in the game of industry associations. We go to a lot of meetings with government departments, and we spend a lot of our time teaching government departments what other government departments are doing in the same sort of space, such as between Border Protection Command and between a Department of Agriculture and and some of these things. And it used to be like that, in defence with different parts of defence, and now it's like that with different parts of government. And it's pretty frustrating. Yeah, if they could get a joint standing committee on, we've got one. Why can't they do it?
2 days ago, I met with the chair of the Joint Standing Committee on Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade and suggested that this is such an important national issue that committee should take it on because it's a complex problem. And thankfully, Senator Fawcett seems very interested. It just needs a lot of the people working in the pieces to go up and say the same message, because that's how we start the national conversation. Because otherwise, it's everyone talking individually, and if you're in an association that, you're looking after your bit. Yes, everyone looks after their bit, but collectively, we've got to look after the country.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll close it there and send everyone a morning tea. I'd like you to put your hands together. From the back we'll go Rob Nairn, Air Vice Marshal John Blackburn, I should say, Lieutenant Commander Mark Bailey and Teresa Lloyd. Thank you very much.